Welcome to episode 0 of Building Java Applications with me, Roberto Marquez. Sometimes as a software developer, I'll set up a secondary computer and screen to have for viewing APIs in a browser or spreadsheet, concerning whatever it is that I'm working on the main screen. But then sometimes the screensaver will come on when I don't want it to. In this video, I'll show how to build a Java-powered application to automate mouse clicks to keep the screensaver from coming on. Sort of like Homer's drinking bird. This is the application's graphical user interface, or GUI, and the button I mentioned. Each button click moves the digital drinking bird one time. Button clicks can be automated by checking off the automatically checkbox here. I'll let it go a few times so you can see that it repeatedly presses the button even if I've moved the mouse after 20 seconds. That's configurable, and we'll talk more about that once we're getting into the actual code. So there it goes again. It's doing it automatically. That wasn't me moving the mouse. And so this is our end goal application. Disclaimer: do not use this application in automatic mode while at work. It is very likely a violation of your company's security policy. So this is the NetBeans IDE. It comes from Oracle Corporation and is free to download from their website, netbeans.org. We're going to be using this IDE, Integrated Development Environment, to develop this project. And the first thing we'll do is use the File menu to create a new project. And you'll notice that it has built-in support for Maven. And we're just going to create a Maven Javafx application. And next. And you can save it wherever you want. And I'm just going to call this Drinking Bird. You can specify the group ID, a version, and the package that you're going to get out of the box. And you hit finish. And now we have the console displaying what Maven is doing. And it's going to basically run the Maven command to create a project. And we have a success message here. It says all of these things happen, like creating a package, a group ID, version. Basically everything we specified in the previous screen. Now you can see that this is where the source code is located for this project. It comes with a FX controller and a main, as well as some other sources that define the layout of the application and styling. Okay, let's look at the POM file for this Maven project. One thing we want to check out is that it has the main class specified here in the properties section. And if you open up this file with Control-O, you'll see that this is the main entry point into our application from the IDE, and it calls this launch button, this launch method, and there's some Javafx stuff going on in the background that knows how to pick up the main class. So I just want to point that out, that it's not magic. The POM file specifies the entry point for the application. And let's run the app. And I want to point out that as is, what it gives you is a Hello World program with a button on screen and a label that changes when you press that button. But when you press the button again, nothing happens. It's just one-time change at this point. Well, because I'm running the screen recorder, it took a little bit of time to come back up, but now we have the application running. You'll see that only the first time when I click the click me button do we get this hello world come out. And nothing happens on screen, but in the console you'll see every time I click it, it says you clicked me. And so, yeah, it just does that for every time I click it. And you can see that this is happening in our controller. So handle button is where we're saying print out to the console you clicked me, and then we're going to get the label and set its text hello world. That's all it does so far. So how does it know which label to change? Well, right here we're specifying that this label is tied to the fxml document because of this fxml annotation. So if we look at the source code, we'll see that label here is used as an ID on this label element. So there's the FX ID, and that's the notation to use to specify an ID. And notice that the button has a similar one called button, and so that ties in later on when we're actually going to do something with the button. And what you actually have to take note of is that here is the action to perform, handle action button on the class that actually, excuse me, the method in XML controller, it looks for it here. So that's how it's tied in, that's how it knows to use the model view control design pattern. And this pretty much is going to provide us with a framework for the rest of the application. One thing I forgot to mention is that these two files are associated with each other because the fxml document specifies, among other things, that its fx controller is this class here. And this corresponds to this file right here. Org Umberto Automation Drinking Bird, which specifies the class path up to this point. And then the actual class should match whatever the class name is. And so that's how it knows where that these IDs are associated with these here. Now we're going to add a little bit of code to keep track of the message and toggle between two messages every time the button is clicked. If you've seen the episode of The Simpsons where Homer's using the drinking bird, you'll remember that the first thing he says when it moves is, "It's drinking the water," and every time it goes back, he's surprised and says, "He's going back for more." So let's get the application to do that every time the button is pressed. So the first thing we'll need is a Boolean variable to hold that state, and we'll just make it private. And we're going to call it label toggle and set it to initial value of true. And currently we're just giving it a string literal right in the set method, but we're going to create another variable to hold the actual text that's going to be displayed of type string, and call it label text. And we won't initialize it yet. And then the next thing we'll do is, depending on if the label toggle is set to true, Then we're going to set it to that first string literal, which is label text. Okay, and if not, then we're going to set label text equal to he is going back for more. Oops, had a typo. And as is, it would just keep printing hello world, so we needed to print the label text that we have. And then finally, we're going to need to toggle the toggle flag. Okay, now it compiles and we can run this and see that every time I click the button, it's going to switch between those two messages. So down here you see it's building the application with the code changes I just made, and it should bring up the UI in just a sec. Okay, the jar is built and it should be executing now. Oh, there it is. So every time I click it, it switches the message. Again, I'll put a link in the description to the GitHub commit up to this point. Next, I want to introduce Scene Builder, the tool used to edit FXML documents. Its original authors created it from scratch as a side project, and it became integrated into NetBeans fairly recently. Let's take a look at it. So before we were just using a plain text editor to edit the FXML document. If you notice, we have another option, which is this Javafx designer. Just basically rebranding of Scene Builder. And so the library comes with all kinds of things that you can just drag and drop into your scene. And the main ones are the containers, which are basically how you do layout management. We'll be using border pane and VBox in this project. And so once you have a container, you can start placing things in it. Right now we just have a button and label, but there are others like Checkbox, which we'll be using, menu bar, scroll bar, pagination, and these other menus provide other things that you can include into your scene. And then say that you have something already on your scene. To get to the properties of that, what you'll do is open the inspector. I wanted to show the inspector, but I couldn't find it, but now I have. So if you want to change like properties in the scene builder, you'll just go to the Javafx Fluidon menu option under Window and go to Inspector, and that'll bring up this side panel here. And at first, if you don't have anything selected, save that. But once you have something selected, this is where you would update it to like whatever you needed, right? And it updates in real time, and you can do whatever you want, maybe white, if that makes sense. Adjust the alignment. But I'm not going to make any changes at this point. I just wanted to show you how you can put objects on the scene graph by dragging and dropping from here. Let me just add the checkbox. Kind of an example of how you could do that. Now we're going to use the border layout manager to reposition the label and the button on the user interface, as well as add an image that will serve as a placeholder for our drinking bird. I've already copied over off screen this image from the fully functional working directory of the actual project that you saw at the beginning of the video. One thing to keep note of is that I placed it in the same directory as the fxml document under resources fxml. Here it is opened in the plain text editor, but we're going to be using the graphical user interface called Scene Builder. And the first thing we're going to do is grab that border layout I mentioned from the library containers box here, and plot and drag and drop it onto the user interface for our application. And you'll notice it has this little handle to move it over, which then allows me to grab the button by itself and put it in the border layout. So I have the option to put it on top, center, or bottom, which is where it will go. Okay, I notice I had to scoot the button over for it to work, so hopefully it'll do it this time. Alright, and then we'll drag and drop a border pane over to the user interface for our application. And I'm going to scoot this over just a tiny bit to make sure that it doesn't freeze again. And so now I'm going to grab this and place it on the bottom border pane. And look for the label. It should be around here somewhere. So let's save this, close it, and see what happened to it in just regular XML. So before we had an anchor pane, and the children were a label and a button. And now we have a border pane, and in the bottom section of it we have the button. And for the other part, I need to make it visible on the UI. So what I'm going to do is open it back up again and give it a label. Small quirk in adding the existing image label, but I found a workaround. So we'll just grab a placeholder label and pop it onto the north or top part of the border pane, and then save this. And we'll go back and look for the same file, but this time open it with the regular editor. And you notice that this is the label we actually want, with the ID of label. So we're just going to take this one out of the children tag and replace it with this one. Save that and go back to the editor to add a placeholder for the image. And you can see that it's still not stretched out, so we'll make this go all the way to the edge and get an image. So we need to stretch out the border pane to extend all the way to the edge of the application window. So we can do that just by dragging that handle there, and we're going to add an image view to serve as a placeholder for the temporary drinking bird image. Okay, if we save this and look at the XML and just regular view, You'll see that has a matter of order, but if this is going to be the top, this will be the bottom, and this is the image view. You notice that nothing is specified for the actual image. So let's go back and tell it which image to use, which is going to be this birdbody.png. So we'll edit it with Scene Builder, and we'll do that with the inspector. Okay, yeah, so right here it's saying image, and it knows that nothing's there. Yeah. And we'll just pick any old image so we can okay, we'll just serve as a temporary image. We'll save that. Go back to XML view, because we need to use a relative path to drinking bird. Excuse me, and then it's bird body. New about it. And this is the one that it's referencing. So now if we save this and run it, we should see our new layout. Well, this is getting up and running. I just want to mention the OS X version of Scene Builder has some quirks. Normally there's a document part of the accordion layout for Scene Builder, and I don't see it in this version. So I've had a few quirks getting this to work. Okay, looks like it's coming up. And there it is. Still changes when we click the button, and I'll put a link in the description to the commit up to this point. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is create a rotate animation that is applied as a transition to the image view. And this is initialized in the code by first creating a placeholder for the object. I can do that here. At the top of the class. So you'll notice in the FXML at the bottom we have an image view, but there's no ID on it. So we're going to create one called the same name as our variable in the controller, which will allow us to apply the annotation, FXML annotation, so that they can be wired up together. And we'll call it the same name as the variable, which is bird body. That's how it gets its ID. And we'll apply the annotation here as well. Next we'll create that rotation transition that I mentioned. it's asking for imports, and that's the one I want. Same thing. And Control-Shift-I in Mac will bring the appropriate import statement in for what we just added. And we finally get to put something in our initialize method, and that will be the setup for the rotate transition. And the first thing we're going to do is initialize it with the new operator. Got cut off. We'll finish initializing this rotate transition with the constructor that specifies how long it's going to be. And we're going to say that's a duration in milliseconds. And we'll get it to rotate. I'm sorry, to be a 3-second animation. And it's going to animate bird body. And then we want to say that the angle that it's going to rotate is by an angle of 90 degrees. And then we'll specify that the rotate transition should cycle a total count of 2 times. And the last configuration part to initialize this rotate transition is to set auto reverse to true. And with that initialize, now all we have to do is play the animation when the button is pressed. And if you remember, this is the method that gets called when the button is pressed. And we'll just have that be the last thing in the method. And we'll play that animation. Now in the image view, this will work. The image view is tied up to the controller because if you remember, we added an ID, bird body, and the corresponding annotation for bird body. So now let's run the app and see the animation for the first time. Normally it's not this slow, but because I'm running the screen capture, it's running slow. Oops, that's the old version of it. And it's still compiling. Bear with me. Alright, it's built. It's executing, so we should have something in just a moment. There it is. Because we set auto reverse to true, it moves back to its original position. Again, I'll put a link in the description with the GitHub commit up to this point. Okay, now we're going to add the automatically checkbox so that you don't have to manually press the button to make the drinking bird move. And we're going to change the layout of the button so that it can take a checkbox underneath. And then I'll go into how to manage the threads so that you can have a clean exit and not have this button pressing thing going on after you've exited the application. So the first thing we're going to do is open up Scene Builder and add a VBox to add to the button and the checkbox. So we'll use graphical user interface. We'll probably have to make this a little bit bigger to make room for the checkbox. And we're going to go ahead and temporarily add it to the left side of the container. And move that to the VBox. And then eventually we'll move that back to the bottom. But I just, for now, want to save and then show you how this changed in the XML document. So on the top we still have the label, the center still has the image view, and now instead of having a bottom, we have a left box that has that vertical box where we moved our button to. So now we're going to move this V box to the bottom part of the border pane. Okay, so currently that whole thing is on the top. I'm going to select the parent. There it is. And it doesn't need to be that big. So we have this V box, and we need a checkbox underneath it, which is under controls. Yep, there it is. Okay, so we have what we want basically laid out. It doesn't look pretty. We probably want this centered. So let's see if we can do that with the inspector. Okay, I'll worry about that later. I want to get to the part of the code where we're doing the automatically button pressing. And to do that, we're going to need a few variables set up. And the first one is the checkbox and associated ID in the FXML document. So here's that checkbox, and notice it doesn't have an ID or anything. And we'll add that now. And you just want to make the names as simple as possible so that it makes remembering them easy. So this variable name will be the ID in the FXML document. So that gives us a handle inside of our controller to this checkbox that's defined in the scene graph. And then next we're going to need a timer task that is going to actually be doing the clicking. And we'll need a robot object to grab hold of the system system peripheral devices. And now we're finally going to need to grab a hold of that button. So we're going to annotate it as well. And Remember, that corresponds to this ID here. Oh, you can see it's doing some explicit layout. That's why we couldn't get it to look pretty earlier. Create a method to handle when the checkbox is clicked, and define that in XML. So here's what it's going to look like when we're handling that checkbox. This is also going to be defined in the fxml document, so we annotated such. And this method takes an action event. And when we notice that the checkbox has been clicked, we need to see if it is checked already or not checked. So the first thing we do is query that checkbox object and see if it is selected. Okay, now we have this is selected method that we're going to check. And if it is selected, then we're going to start the timer. And the first time it will go off is immediately. So we'll create a date object with no parameters, which gives it the instance now. We're going to instantiate this class, but it's one I haven't mentioned yet, so we'll get to it in just a second. It's going to be called clickTask. And then we're going to define how long the period should be before it goes off again. And we'll just say every 20 seconds. Now for the demo, I'll put 10. Every 10 seconds it's going to go off. And then and date. And then finally we'll schedule that task with the timer that we set up earlier. And the first timer we specified. And the period to go off. Oops, we forgot to initialize a timer. That's not a problem. And then these new variables need to be initialized, and we'll do that in the initialize method. And we're going to create a try-catch block, and we're going to be catching any AWT exceptions. And what we're going to do is initialize the robot. And set its auto delay to 40 milliseconds. Set its auto wait for idle to be true. And we'll log that exception if anything happens. And after that, we need to set up the timer, initialize the timer. And we're going to create a method to call elsewhere that lets us shut down all of the threads correctly. And all that does is call timer.cancel. And for the sake of brevity, I'm going to copy and paste in that click task that I mentioned before. And what it does is when it's called, it finds where that button is on the screen by doing some manipulation of the coordinates of the scene graph, the window, and the size of the screen. And it looks good on the inputs. Whoops, maybe that one's not right. We need the Javafx version. And then in the next part, we'll go over how this stop threads method is called in the main class. Now I'm going to show how the threads are managed from the main class for the application. And we're going to change up a few things about how the scene graph gets loaded up, the FXML class gets loaded. And the first thing we're going to do is pull out the URL for the resource file. And it's just going to be all of this. And actually we're going to use the static, the non-static version of it. So we're going to declare private FXML loader, call it loader, and now we'll instantiate loader based on that URL. And the parent will now be initialized not by the static method, but by this instance that we just created. And while we're here, we can change the title to something more appropriate. And in our main method, we won't change anything, but we will now be overriding one of the methods from the application class, namely the one that's used for cleanup, and it's called stop. And this is where we will call the stop threads method I mentioned earlier that was created in the other class. And we'll get the controller from the loader, and that basically will let us call stop threads. And now our application is thread safe. And I'm going to run the application. It's not going to be have the final layout, but I'll adjust the FXML so that it centers everything, and all of that will be in the GitHub commit for the project up until this point. And thank you for bearing with me while I have this thing compile, build the source packages. I may just edit this out. This code compile, build, execute lifecycle is generally not this slow on NetBeans, especially with the specs I have on this machine. It's the recording software that's slowing it down. And here the exec. Okay, so there's our checkbox, and now it actually does something. Let's verify that still works, the button. And when I click check automatically, oops, we forgot to add the handler to the XML. So in the controller, we defined this handle checkbox method, but we never set it up. We never wired it to the actual checkbox, and we do that with the on action, and we pass it handle checkbox action. I'm not sure what happened there, but what I will do is just erase it. It's a kind of glitch. Now when we run it, it will actually do something when you check the checkbox. Now that we've wired it up correctly. I'll edit this out so that you don't waiting for the code compile, build, execute cycle to go through my seemingly slow machine. Or will I? Alright, so it's building jar. Okay, so the checkbox clicks it. We specified the delay for 10 seconds, so let's figure at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, there it is. Okay, like I mentioned, off camera, I'm going to center the checkbox and click button and get us a pretty little bird. Now we're going to add another layout manager so that the animation looks a little more realistic. Not quite completely realistic, but you know, it's an improvement. So we're going to add a stack pane to the user interface that will allow us to stack the 3 different images of the bird. 3 different images being the background, the body, and the foreground. So if you'll remember, we can drag and drop items to and from the UI from the library. And we're going to put it on, and let's just do it to the right because it can be either one. Now we have a stack pane here, and I'm going to move the bird to that stack pane. And then here you can tell we're on the image view, but I want to select the stack pane, and I'm going to move that back into the center of the border layout. Okay, so now that bird is centered, and we'll save this. Nothing really changed so far. We just added a layout manager, but now the layout manager allows us to stack things on top of each other. And you can see in the XML version, the center pane now has a stack pane, and there's an image view in there. And for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this guy here because we need 3. Now notice that it's complaining because of the ID. We only need the middle one to still have the ID. So we'll get rid of this ID here because they have to be unique. And this one. So that would actually put 3 of the same image stacked up on top of each other, which it wouldn't mean anything. But what we really want is to have the images that I chopped up off screen of the original drinking bird. So we're going to copy that excuse me, from where I have them already working. And so that's the background. We already have bird body, and so the other part to get is foreground. So we need these 2 files. We'll paste them in the same directory as the others. And now we can update the image so that they're all different. So the background one, which will be the one that is stacked first. and it knows about it. And then the middle will stay the same because that's the one we had already. And this one will be foreground. Oops. And this one needs to be, sorry, we do need to update this one to bird body. And I think we're good. It should now show only the torso part of the bird animating. Again, all we changed was add a layout manager and add 2 images before, under and on top of the body of the bird. If I could make this faster, I would. It's just it takes a couple of minutes to compile. Okay, we're at the exec part of the build. Oops. And it showed the UI. And that's how we were able to animate just the body part. There was a typo in the last viewing and you couldn't see the cup, but I fixed it and now you can tell there's a foreground, the body, which is the middle, and a background, which is the cup. So now you have a working application that keeps your screensaver from turning on. But how would you deploy it? Well, because we're using a Maven managed build, there's a directory that stores all of the build files underneath the project file structure. And here's where I have the GitHub project checked out to, under this building Java application / direct drinking bird. And here's a target directory I mentioned. And you'll find in there a jar file called one Berto building Java applications drinking bird. And if you have the latest version of Java on your system, which is Java 8 at this point, and you double click this jar, it'll bring up the user interface, and it works just like if you were running it from within NetBeans, except without the overhead of NetBeans. And everything should work just like before. It's drinking the water. The automatically checkbox shows that he's going back for more. And then you can share this app with anybody you know that has the latest runtime for Java. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more building Java applications content.